On Friday the 18th of April, I went to the Severn Valley Railway for their Spring Steam Gala, which featured a combination of resident and visiting locomotives in steam. The SVR is a heritage line running for 16 miles from Kidderminster to Bridgnorth, but, at the time of filming, trains out of Kidderminster were only going as far as Hampton Loade. This was due to ongoing repairs to the section of track damaged by a landslip earlier in 2025. Despite being severed from the rest of the line, there was still some activity at Bridgnorth station. 5700 Pannier Tank number 7714 was shuttling back and forth over a short section of track, with passengers riding in this coach from a Class 108 diesel multiple unit. One could also see at least 4 locomotives parked outside the workshop. This one is rebuilt Bullied Pacific number 34027 Tor Valley, and she was a regular performer on the SVR until March 2024, when she was withdrawn for overhaul. One of the famous 1400 class 042 tank engines could also be found in the yard. Out of the 4 members of this class in preservation, 1450 is the only one that's currently in working order. Hiding behind the waiting room was Pannier Tank 1501, the sole surviving example of the unusual GWR 1500 class of 1949. But she's currently out of action following the expiry of her boiler ticket in January 2023. Also found in the yard was 43106, the sole surviving LMS IVIT 4MT class 260. Much like 1501, the IVIT 4MT is another locomotive whose boiler ticket expired recently. Meanwhile, 4930 Hagley Hall was parked on the other platform, and visitors were allowed to climb up on the footplate. Incidentally, I stupidly forgot to get more shots up here than just this one. In any case, this locomotive returned to service in 2022 after an overhaul, but wasn't in steam for the gala. At this point, we decided it was time to get back in the car and go down to Kidderminster. The town of Kidderminster has 2 railway stations right next to each other. The Severn Valley uses one called Kidderminster Town, while a separate station, just called Kidderminster, is used by mainline trains, specifically the Class 172 Turbostars from West Midlands Railway. Upon arrival at the SVR station, we found a 6880 Betton Grange waiting to leave. This locomotive is quite significant, for she is a new build finished in April 2024, with the project having taken 25 years to complete. I initially thought that I hadn't got any footage of this locomotive in motion, but I realised I was wrong when I looked back at what I had taken on the day. In a nearby head shunt, one could find LMS Jubilee 460 number 45699 Galatea in disguise as 45627 Sierra Leone. I know that Sierra Leone is a country in Africa, but the name mainly reminds me of a song by the New Zealand band Coconut Rough. Personally, I would have preferred to see 45699 Galatea disguised as 45570 New Zealand, but that's just me. There were lots of stands at Kidderminster town selling books, models or other railway memorabilia, but the only items I bought were these Ertel models of Rusty and Oliver, and they cost £3 each. These two were acquired from a stand run by the society who built 6880 Betton Grange. Thinking back to 45699 Galatea, she was parked next to a small platform where people could climb up onto the footplate. Out of the 7 locomotives whose footplates I stood on throughout the trip, this was the only one that was actually in steam at the time. As someone who's seen, driven, and tried to tolerate the Jubilee 460s in Train Sim World, it was, dare I say, incredible to end up on the footplate of the real thing. We'll see Galatea again later in the video. Despite the event being a steam gala, this DMU was also in operation between Kidderminster and Hampton Loade. Curiously, this set comprised 2 vehicles from a Class 108 and 1 from a Class 101. I decided to ride up to Highley aboard the DMU, as I wanted to see what was in the engine house. As we leave Kidderminster, we'll pass the diesel depot, and things to look out for include Class 37 number 37308 and Class 42 warship number D821 Greyhound. On the way to Highley, the DMU had to stop at Bewdley to allow 45596 Bahamas, another LMS Jubilee, to clear the single-track section ahead. We also had to stop at Erlestoke to pass another steam-hauled service. This time, the locomotive was BR Standard 4MT Class 460 number 75069, but why she was hauling LNER Gresley teak coaches is anyone's guess. Eventually, we made it to Highley, where the DMU dropped off her passengers before shunting over to the crossing loop to make way for 6880 Betton Grange. And now we come to the engine house at Highley. This building houses a small collection of out-of-service steam locomotives on display, and there's also a gift shop and cafe to boot. One of the locomotives on display was 7819 Hampton Manor, one of 9 preserved examples of the Great Western Railway 7800 Manor class, and one of the few survivors that's not painted in an overused British Railways livery for once. Frankly, I hate how this looks with the tender set so far back from the locomotive, although I understand that this would have been done to make the footplate more accessible. And to be fair, the setup with 7819 doesn't look anywhere near as ridiculous as what's been done to Dean Good's 2516 at the Steam Museum in Swindon. Alongside 7819 was 48773, one of the famous LMS Stanier 8F class 280s. A staggering 852 examples of this class were built between 1935 and 1946, with the class's history being inextricably linked to World War II. In the case of what we now know as 48773, she was built in 1940 and has an interesting history involving service in Iran and Egypt, before eventually being repatriated to Britain in 1952. She initially worked on the Longmoor Military Railway before joining the British Railways fleet in 1957, and for a full story, I recommend reading this locomotives page on the Severn Valley Railway's website. She last ran under her own power in 2008, and has been on display in the engine house ever since. Sitting directly in front of the 8F was another Great Western Railway 5700 class Pannier Tank, like 7714 up at Bridgnorth. This one is 5764, although she's currently painted in the iconic London Transport maroon livery with the number L95. London Transport famously acquired 13 Pannier tanks between 1958 and 1963 for use on permanent way trains, and they remained in service right up until 1971. This locomotive has been an SVR resident for her entire preserved life, but last ran under her own power in 2011, and was repainted back in the LT maroon livery in 2018. Out of all the locomotives I saw in the engine house, my favourite is easily the War Department Austerity 210 No. 600, Gordon. This absolute unit was designed by Robert Riddles and built in 1943, originally under the number 73651. After the war, the Army continued to use this locomotive on the Longmoor Military Railway until its closure in 1969. Although Gordon has run under his own power in preservation, he's been on static display in the engine house ever since it opened in 2008, and last ran under his own power in 1999. And now we return to the SVR proper, where we see 7812 Erlestoke Manor running tender first with a train from Kidderminster. It was quite weird seeing a locomotive in BR colours hauling coaches in GWR colours, but that's the preservation era for you. I initially thought that 7812 was going all the way to Hampton Loade, but I was soon proven wrong. Come to think of it, feel free to watch this space for my eventual video on the West Somerset Railway, which will feature 7812 again. At this point, I thought I'd seen enough on the Severn Valley Railway, so I decided to go back to Kidderminster behind 45699 Galatea. We had to stop at Bewdley again, and coincidentally, the locomotive we were waiting on happened to be 45596 Bahamas once again. Bahamas is notable for being the only preserved LMS Jubilee with a double chimney. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to watch Bahamas leaving, as I needed to get back on Galatea's train. As we leave Bewdley, look out for the random Class 37 diesel locomotive parked in one of the sidings. And that's about it for my coverage of the Severn Valley Railway. Despite the poor weather, I still enjoyed my time on this line, and was impressed with the amount of steam locomotives in operation, although I can't really pick a favourite from the selection. In any case, I recommend visiting the SVR yourself if you ever get the chance. It's well worth a visit, even without the full Kidderminster to Bridgnorth service. For now, I'll leave you with a teaser for what to expect in the next video from my UK trip.